Welcome to Supporting Force Readiness Through Data, a podcast exploring how technology and innovative solutions are transforming support for military service members and their families. As demands on U.S. Armed Forces continue to grow, the need for holistic care has never been greater. At the intersection of technology and care, digital platforms are opening new opportunities for upstream prevention, intervening before crises arise. They are also providing a digital roadmap to enhance access to vital services, helping service members and their families navigate life's challenges that can impact readiness. In today's episode, we'll dive into the importance of leaders having access to timely, relevant information to make informed decisions with tools like dashboards that offer a comprehensive view of the health of the force, including training, medical readiness, and mental well-being. Joining me today from Leidos are Tony Kurta and Dr. Keita Franklin, who will share insights into how evolution of data is shaping readiness and resilience across the force. Tony and Keita, thank you so much for joining us today. Well, Tony Kurta and Keita Franklin, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Susan. Great to be here.
Yes, thanks for having us.
Wonderful. Well, why don't we just dive in and get started? Tony, can you talk more about how health data currently flows through the military branches?
Well, the answer to that question is a lot longer than it might seem, and it's a very complicated subject. And one person might think, anybody might think, why are we talking about data when it comes to health? But it turns out that the data is the key to unlocking better health, whole health for our service members and for their family. Unfortunately, when data is collected, it's usually collected for a very singular purpose. And there's a data usage agreement that tells the services or DoD exactly how you can use that data. And of course, that is rooted in data privacy. And sometimes when it's health data in HIPAA, right? So people own their own data. That's a little bit less true in the military than it is in some other places, but we still have a very singular focus on privacy. And we have that delicate balance between protecting people's data and their privacy versus the DoD, needs access to that data in a greater degree and to use it to a greater degree in order to unlock the benefits of having all that data and provide more readiness and more health. So each of the services in many ways collects data individually. Each one has its own data usage agreement. They sometimes aggregate them in databases, but it's not all in a central repository. Aside from your health information, which is now collected by the Defense Health Agency and is resident there. Service record data is collected by the services. It's all collected at the Defense Manpower Data Center, DMDC. But those two really central repositories of data around which we're concerned with health data, service record data, if we call it, are in separate places, and the two don't mix very, very easily. So it presents quite a challenge if you're trying to aggregate data for information to the commanders for dashboards, or whether it's access to more data to make better health decisions.
That's great, Tony. Thank you so much. And Keita, how is the data in behavioral health? Could you tell us a little bit more about that? And what data would leaders reference to get a full picture?
It's such a good question because Tony set us up for this question, I think, just by talking about the delicate balance between privacy and people's individual rights to their own data, but also this need for the larger system to better understand the data for their troops and even their families if it's available and out there. So definitely from the lens of behavioral health over the years, I think commanders are interested in all sorts of data points. And I think it's not uncommon for them to want to get their hands on every little bit of data that they can, although it's often also, I think, sometimes not easy. But everything from PTSD rates to rates of depression, rates of anxiety. So like your traditional mental health sort of prevalence, if you will, prevalence rates data. But then also, I think they're also interested in more upstream data too, like, things around other types of social determinants of health. It might be good for a commander to know, how many spouses in the unit work, since we know that spouse employment is important to military retention. Also things like suicide risk on the way other end of the spectrum. How many people in my unit have made an attempt of suicide or are having ideations of suicide? How many have struggled with domestic violence? And are they the same people that are also perhaps struggling with alcohol use issues? So there's like a whole host of data, and looking at it holistically, I think is very helpful for leaders in today's military.
That's great. Thank you so much, Keita. So, how is whole health entering the force readiness conversation? Tony?
I want to go back to something that Keita said there, and she, when she was talking about the destructive behavior. She and I have had these conversations for years when she was leading the Defense Suicide Prevention Office. And, obviously we were tasked with reducing the number of destructive behaviors across the force. It was interesting because our conversations always came down to data. We were always talking about how do we get access to more data? How do we aggregate in a manner that is useful to policymakers, useful to the commanders, useful to the individuals? It was quite a conversation. Here we are, some years later, and we're still basically talking, about the same issue. But when you're talking whole health, again, you have to have more than just access to the medical data, and that goes back to the earlier conversation about, where is all of that data resident. So, whether it's, as Keita said, it's financial data or data on the spouses, it's all resident in those different areas, but you have to put it together in a dashboard and in a way that the commanders can understand the whole health of individuals. Because, and this is especially true for the Army and the Marines, the readiness of the individual equals, their combat power and their combat strength and their lethality, even more of a way, probably more directly than the Navy and the Air Force. But, the individual has to be ready, focused on the mission, and available to perform, 24/7 if you want to have overall unit readiness. And, as we look at world events, readiness is at least as important now as ever. And if you, use your crystal ball, maybe it's more important here in the coming years. So we have to ensure that the individuals are ready. We have to ensure that the families are ready. We talk resiliency, which means that when the service member deploys, the family and the dependents are back and they have the resiliency and the skill sets to cope with financial issues, nutritional issues, whatever issues may arise, so that the service member, while they're deployed, can focus on the task at hand. That increasingly becomes more difficult as social media and there's more digital access when you're on deployment than there used to be in the past, when you would get a letter every 30 days and that would be your update from home. Now it's near instantaneous, so you don't want to call them distractions because they're part of the individual's daily life, but that the information from home is available on a near instantaneous basis to our deployed forces, and so that sometimes take away from your ability to focus on the task at hand.
I think that's so true. I mean, I often talk about, years ago, my father was in the Navy, and we would, my sister and I would write these 30-word telegrams to him that would like get read over a wire through an ombudsman. And, we were always told not to include any bad news, whether the dog died or, anything in between. And fast forward many years to being a mental health provider myself in the active duty, side of the house. This is, the idea of anything can get said at any time, and you just don't also know the context of which people are dealing with in the while they're downrange or at these deployed locations. And it can be a protective factor when they can stay in touch, but it can also be a stressor. And so I appreciate Mr. Kurta's comments around all of that and making sure that people are communicating and staying in touch as best they can, but also recognizing that there's some caution sometimes with it, and the military's come full circle with that. So I'm always glad when families can stay in touch, particularly during deployments overall. But I recognize that it's sometimes can be a little bumpy for particularly young families and families with young children.
Understood. There's a whole other area where the data can be useful, but also as a caution, right? In terms of coming in and going out. So, as services expand for service members and their families, what determines success when it comes to access?
Oh
Tony?
boy, that really is the essential question. I guess step one, of course, is you have to ensure that the service members and their families know what services are available. There's a plethora of services. Each individual service has services available for the service members and their families. DoD on a broader level has other programs. It seems that services are coming at you from just about every angle. So it's tough to know if I got a bad car loan down the street. Who do I go to? Of course, we always tell the service members you go to the chain of command, but then the chain of command has the same issue. What's my next step for the bad car loan? Or what if somebody has a need for more food at home? What if somebody needs some more financial counseling? Where do you go? So I think step one is just awareness, and it's not as easy as it seems because there's just so much available. The second is many of the services are available in brick and mortar buildings on a base or a post. And that worked in the past when many families or most families lived on base, but increasingly families are moving off base and they don't necessarily have a reason to go on the base very often. Often the commissaries and exchanges are off base. So going through the gates to that brick and mortar place is less and less the primary option. So you have to meet people where they are. And where are people? Well, people are online. People are using digital assets. People are in social media. So Keita knows this much better and can talk more about it. But particularly in when you're going for mental health counseling or a checkup or something, having that appointment or that contact over an iPad or something like that may help reduce the stigma or people's reluctance to have that. You don't want to go onto the base and into a sign that says, mental health counseling for all. Well, nobody's going to walk through that. Or same with financial counseling. So you have to have the modalities available that people will use. They have to know how to get access to those, and then you have to promote them and have those channels that are available.
Excellent. Keita, what would you like to add about that?
I would, I 100% agree with Tony on this. And the only few things that I would add about this, and the VA has done a really good job, I think, in recent years on building trust with the program so that, and I think that's just a fine example in terms of lessons learned. Like the people need to know that when they come to you, that you're going to be there for them from like a provider standpoint, that you're going to give them the best possible care. They're going to get at, that it's going to come from the science, from a place of evidence, and that they trust you, that you're going to keep their information confidential, or you're going to disclose to them if you can't do that for some reason, if it's like a harm to self or harm to others, and you're going to handle their situation in a careful way with all the sensitivities that it requires when they're talking to you about some of their most, intimate struggles and just difficult times of their life. So that trust factor, I always appreciate when I see these organizations that will push out information where they're like measuring the trust within an organization, because it just resonates for me in our field of behavioral health so much. But also, I think some of the practical things we sometimes miss, like making sure that people have a way, if they do go in person, that they have a ride, like transportation. Believe it or not, there are still folks that don't have a driver's license or that haven't sort of navigated that yet, and that they have childcare available, and perhaps that they can go at 7 p.m, or they can pop on a call with a headset in the evening, as Tony described. That access is really a national problem. It's a problem outside the military community. Like if somebody asked us, like, what are the top 5 problems in the field of behavioral health, access would probably be right up there. And I think part of why it's so important for behavioral health is the immediacy. Like when people need help, they need help. And so like we need to get them in, and giving them an appointment. The field of behavioral health will sometimes have these standards where we'll get you in within 5 days or within 10 days. And if not, within 60 miles, and they'll have all these sort of things. And, if we really were in charge for a day, if people were able to call in and get help that day, like a same day appointment, that would just be incredible. Anyways, in my side, that's what I would advocate for. I don't know how you feel about that, Mr. Kurta.
Well, I think trust is a great word to talk about. We go back to the beginning and we said, DoD has all of this data available, but doesn't necessarily have all the rights to it all of the time. And even though we do give up many of our rights when we put on the uniform, we don't give up all our data privacy rights. And without that trust, we'll never have service members and their families sharing the data with us or with DoD, such that we can aggregate it all and make some useful information out of it. Useful to the family, useful to the service members, and useful to leadership too, right? They need to have this brought all together in a dashboard in a way that's usable to them so that they can understand the readiness of their units and make the appropriate decisions that they need to make. And again, if DoD cannot establish that trust with service members and their families, people will hoard their individual data. Stigma will remain
Yes.
a very, very strong issue in people's minds, and people will be less ready. They will be less well, and overall DoD will be less ready.
I appreciate your comment about the dashboard too, Tony. In part, in some cases, these commanders are young and new to the field. Think of an Army captain and all of the complexities with data. Like we've gotten to this point where, you and I have had these conversations about data and we just rattle it off, right? We rattle off, oh, we need to know E1 to E4 rates of this, prevalence of that, is it, and we just get right into it. But when you're like an O3 in the Army and you're responsible for so many other things, you've maybe not like taken coursework in data analytics. You maybe don't exactly understand that, okay, they're slicing the data this way. And like to do all this sense making. So whenever you talk about this dashboard, it resonates with me just in the context of like an easy way for a leader to consume it when they don't live and breathe in it every day like we do. I know even earlier on in my own career, I didn't know everything I know now about data. And so, I'm always learning, and it's a lot for these people to pick up when it's not perhaps their main job, and they're also trying to meet other parts of the mission.
And understanding why it's so important, right? Because there's just so much for them
Exactly.
to be able to be
Overload.
ready for. Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you for sharing that. Be nice to have that dashboard as that easy button, right? To be able to take a
Right.
look, have a nice baseline of these are the things that I need to worry about or be concerned with. And if you have buy-in from those leaders to understand it, they could get those service members help at back to that trust on both sides.
Right. But those
Excellent.
dashboards, just provide the leaders with the warning signs, right? Something needs to flash yellow. I need to put some brain power and some people power onto this aspect of the unit or towards these people. Get the help that is needed. Yes, you're exactly right.
So the
in
human
close,
factor, you're
the
saying like the
human
human factor still has to kick in, right? Yep.
exactly. So in closing, Tony and Keita, what more would you like to wrap it up in a nice little bow in terms of how the importance of data shaping the readiness and resilience across the force? Tony?
I go back on a 40-year career in DoD, and when I first came in, there was this big thirst because we didn't have enough information to make decisions. And this wasn't just on personnel. This was combat decisions on a ship. It was like, I need more information. I need more information. So now we fast forward 40 plus years, and we don't know what to do with all the information that we have. It's overwhelming, and the human mind can't sift through it and determine what is important in a time frame that is useful and relevant to the decisions that need to be made. So DoD has two problems now. One is to synthesize the data that we have in a way, going back to those dashboards, in a way that people can make timely, relevant decisions. The second part of that, or maybe the underlying part of that, is we have to aggregate and have access to all of the data that is out there. We have to build that trust with the service members. We will use your data to the betterment of you, to the betterment of the force, to the betterment of readiness. Trust us with that data. And then, the technical problem of aggregating it all and putting it on the dashboard, I think, is easier than establishing the trust and determining what is the useful information and getting it to people on time. So the challenge has shifted somewhat over the years. It's a little harder, but it's less a technical challenge and probably more now about the trust with our service members and their families that we will do right by their data.
Keita?
And I think for me, in terms of the big picture, of course, I'm going to come at it from a lens of behavioral health. And when we have a full scope of the data and we're able to get our arms around people early, that's what matters most. Particularly with the military community, where there is this stigma attached to, coming into mental health. If we can use data to identify people who might be struggling, like we say, upstream, in a way that we can get them help, the level of help is also less intrusive. And it's also, truth be told, it's also less expensive when you're able to help people from like a budgetary standpoint. Like if you're able to help people in a community when they're struggling with one or two risk factors before you're needing them, to bring them into inpatient where it's very complex, it's very stigmatizing. And it's also stigmatizing when they leave that treatment and go back to the unit. So for me, like using data to help people early is just the name of the game.
Awesome.
From a behavioral health lens.
I absolutely love it. Early intervention is the best prevention, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. That was a really great, thoughtful discussion, providing perspective around that data. So thank you both so much.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.